My name is Brittany, but you can call me Bert. I'm 37 years old and I'm debt free. Now, I know this is a philosophy channel and you're probably thinking, what do finances have to do with philosophy? But actually a lot. I got a question from one of my Discord members and I'm going to answer it today. They said, could you do content about your path of overspending because of mental health, moving to a place where you budget and can save money and be financially secure? And basically, how did you get there? Yes, I can. I'm going to share a lot of lore with you. And I just want you to remember that at the end of the day, making money is basically how you labor for yourself and your community. It's not always about the dollar amount you bring in. It's about how you show up and what your role is in the story, in your community, and in your life. This is the philosophical part. You're a person born into existence and now you have to survive. So how do we go from surviving to living? And no, the answer at the end of this video will not be become a millionaire, because I am not a millionaire. Maybe you've heard the story of Diogenes. He was kind of known as a wandering philosopher. Exiled from his community, he was basically unhoused, homeless. And he had two great epiphanies and two specific stories that people often tell about him. The first, that Diogenes, after being stripped of everything, walked the earth and found ways to be incredibly independent. In other words, not dependent on the material. And one day, Diogenes, with a single wooden bowl, witnesses a boy cupping his hands and using it to drink water. As Diogenes sees this, he has an epiphany. What a fool he has been to even need a wooden bowl. This is a statement about material good. And it obviously plays into this idea about hoarding wealth. Even more than that, there's a story of when Diogenes met Alexander the Great, or rather Alexander the Great met Diogenes. It is said, quote, at the approach of so many people, Diogenes sat up a little and fixed his eyes on Alexander. When the king greeted him and asked if there was anything he wanted, Diogenes replied, yes, that you should stand a little out of my sun. It is said that Alexander was so impressed by this and by the arrogance and grandeur of spirit of a man who could treat him with such disdain that he said to his courtiers, who were laughing and joking about the philosopher as they walked away, but I'll tell you this, if I were not Alexander, I would be Diogenes. Often when I tell this story on stream, I add a little bit more, emphasis or sass into Diogenes' reply, but you get the point. He looked up at the great Alexander and wanted for nothing. I think this has been displayed throughout history. You can even think of somebody like Jesus Christ as the example of somebody who doesn't need the riches of the earth to have the riches of heaven. This is philosophy. And the question is, what is your relationship with the need to hoard, the need for the material, and what is the balance between the material reality that we must labor and survive, and the balance between hoarding more than you need? I am a middle-class YouTuber who has a very stable job, and even though I say that, I'm constantly worried I'm not working enough and that I won't save for retirement, and I'm worried that one day I'll wake up and this will all go away, which I think is actually a pretty common experience for most people in most industries, because I've even seen older people be laid off. Everyone called into the factory to be told there's no job or no work for next week. I've seen people, adults, during the '08 crash have to work at fast food restaurants after making six figures at a corporate office. So whether you're an artist or an entrepreneur or you work for somebody else, there's no guarantee of employment. So again, when we talk philosophically about being an animal on the planet, being birthed into existence without our consent, we are really learning how to labor. Sometimes laboring means showing up for the family, helping with chores, taking care of children, helping in different ways that you couldn't even imagine. So like I said, I'm 37, but I didn't really lock in financially until I turned about 30. And that's because at 30, I had a huge philosophical awakening, if you will, a realization, a real sit down, lock in, what are my values? What am I doing here on the planet? And why do I continue existing every day? From the point that I was 8 years old, living in a homophobic house, to the point that I was 30, I was basically having unaliving thoughts and attempts. I did have the goal of dying basically at 35. So when I reached my unaliving age, which I did actually make a video about on my other channel, when I reached that age, it was an amazing feeling. But most of my life up until 30, I figured I was gonna die. So there was no reason to invest in long-term thinking. As I say that though, there were times in my 20s when I had these like girl boss dreams and I was like, I'm gonna be a capitalist.
4,000.
I know.
And there's a waiting list.
I assumed.
5 years.
For a bag?
It's not a bag. It's a Birkin.
And I'm gonna be rich and I'm gonna be Miranda Priestley from Devil Wears Prada. And I was eating up Sex in the City and I just had all of these aspirations and goals and I wanted to be Samantha Jones. And one thing after another led me into a realization that I just don't care about this stuff.
Learning about this stuff.
This
stuff.
Yes, I like pretty things, and yes, I love to go shopping, but it's not enough of a motivator to keep me alive. I needed a bigger reason to stay alive.
I wanted to talk about specifically learning yourself outside of how others see you. I've been really thinking about this because I've been so many different Britneys over the years, specifically like very political Britneys. I've had a very specific lens in how I've valued and viewed myself. A lot of time online, and I mentioned this during the live show, and this is really what really was the epiphany for me, so hopefully this inspires you, is I was sitting in my room thinking to myself, like, who am I? Who am I just like as a human at my very core and base? Who am I regardless of how people have viewed me?
The numbers are a little blurry now, but by the time I was 30, I owned a trailer, a car, and I had a bunch of consumer debt. I felt really overwhelmed and I was sort of desperate to remake my life over. I was going through a lot of things personally and I just wasn't sure who I wanted to be in the story. So I did a couple of sort of desperate actions and I went on 2 specific road trips.
Where I'm going today is the Chapel of the Holy Cross. I'm really excited to see this as a former Catholic, now atheist, born and raised Catholic, confirmed and everything. This is the Cave Springs campsite in Sedona, Arizona. Sedona by far is the prettiest place I've seen. Beautiful. So I'm setting up camp. And of course, it's just me.
The first one I did cities and road tripped in my car, and that was a lot of fun. Lived off basically like $1,500 a month. My second attempt at a road trip, I actually bought a trailer because I thought I was gonna have some sort of like Pinterest cabin girl life, trailer life, van life. It was truly a desperate attempt at taking control over my life, but I wasn't mentally ready and I wasn't philosophically ready. So I did buy a $16,000 trailer, which of course I never made my money back on. And I traveled around the US to all of the national parks, forests, and basically rural areas.
I'm in New Mexico and I'm headed south to White Sands. I'm just so glad things went the way they did.
It was on that second road trip though that I had an epiphany, a realization that I was just an animal on a planet and that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with simply existing. We are on this floating rock in space. And it wasn't just this nihilistic, like, oh no, it was sort of a, oh, okay, what do I do with that? But it wasn't over yet. My philosophical journey still took a little bit longer for me to come to an even greater realization that I am, nature experiencing itself, but that's for later in the story. So once I had that realization, I was still sort of like closing up a lot of the chapters of my toxic years, being in relationships with people who weren't getting better, trying to save people when they couldn't save themselves, going to therapy and realizing like, Brittany, do you want to wake up every day? And I had to come to the realization, like, not only do I want to wake up every day, but the only reason I wanted to unalive myself was because of the world. And once I recognized that I had no control over the world and I let go of the attachment to outcome, I realized like, oh, there was so much to live for.
First, we will open the Earth Chakra. It deals with survival and is blocked by fear. And your vision is not real. You must surrender those fears. You have opened your Earth Chakra.
And that meant, oh my gosh, wait, now there's so much I have to save for. And that meant, oh my gosh, wait, now I really have to figure out my career because your girly is, yes, anti-capitalist now. With that said, when it comes to how I individually labor, it does fall on me to figure out what I'm doing. And it falls on all of us to figure out what we're doing. So yes, we're individuals. So when we think about introspection and we think about philosophy and the philosophical framework I'm working on, the levels, we're asking ourselves, who am I in relation to myself? Who am I in relationship to everything outside of myself? Because these are 2 different versions of you. Kind of like how you have a work self and a school self and a single self and a married self and, who you are with your besties and who you are with your parents. We're multifaceted people. I had to think about, okay, Brittany, like who are you going to be? Because I'm also late diagnosed autistic. I am a plan girly. I'm not a spontaneous girly. I need a plan. And so for me, it wasn't until I really decided like what is going to be my career that I could really make it happen. All my life, I tried to be a content creator, but I could tell that I was drowning in my mental health, drowning in my conflicting philosophies. I was drowning in politics. I was drowning in like who I was, and I was being torn in all these different directions. So then finally around 30, I sat down, wrote down my values, locked in, and everything kind of got better. I decided I was going to be a content creator full time, and I've been doing it 7 years full time. I went to therapy, and that was amazing. I did put that on a credit card, so note that in your journals that it did cost me about $3,000 to go to therapy, and it was the best debt I ever went into. So don't be afraid of going into debt if it's basically like go into debt and go to therapy or unalive. Like, I would rather you go into debt. And also now with where I am in this current iteration of Brittany, I am debt free and I will not go into debt unless I absolutely need to. And you just never know if you will, because see, I've been here before. Fun fact, in 2022-ish, 2021-ish, I was, I had all this consumer debt. I had all of this car debt and trailer debt, and I paid it off. I made a lot more money and I used every extra dollar I made towards my debt, and I became completely debt free. And I thought I did it. I liberated myself. And then I had a medical emergency and I had to spend like $20K just on that alone. And plus I didn't account for how much money I made, so that I didn't account for how big my IRS bill would be. And then I got a big bill from the IRS and I was like, so it is like a blessing, but a curse, because I hadn't made a lot of money ever in my life. And then I had like a really good year where I made 6 figures, and that was a big deal. So that took a while to pay off. And just for the record, out of all the years I've been doing this full time, that's the only year I've made 6 figures. Otherwise, I make a healthy income, but nowhere near a full 6 figures. That medical emergency really took a turn, because it was a few years of trying to get a diagnosis, and then a few years of recovery, and then a few years of like learning my body, and a few years of making investments in things that I thought would help me, like a nutritionist that was way too expensive. Just for some input, I did eventually get diagnosed with fibromyalgia. It is a chronic health issue and I am in constant pain, but I'm working through it, and I found some light at the end of the tunnel with my doctor's help.
You'll find your balance, but I've known for a decade and still get resentful of my body. I am pissed at my body. Like, I am upset. I have so many problems, and I'm just like so annoyed because I had figured out how to balance everything. And then this news came up and I'm like, really, bro? Like, so fucked up, bro. I have so many fucking problems. Like, I don't need another one. But my mother always says the universe or God doesn't give you more than you can handle. And I believe that. I do believe that.
But now that we've seen the rheumatologist and my ANA and all those things have come back, it's fibromyalgia, which just means like a lot of chronic pain. So it's same thing, like foggy brain, shortness of breath. Your bones and nerves just feel like they're shooting off in all the horrible ways. Like, it's definitely not something I'm excited about having, but at least I have a name for it. At least I can move forward.
I will say I did get roped into buying this nutritionist course, and I do regret investing my money in that course. It was like $16K. I'm not exaggerating. Go ahead and make fun of me in the comments, because honestly, worst financial decision I ever made. I was under so much stress, and I think I was just so desperate for an answer. And because she was suggested to me from a women's group, and because she was like a person of color and said she was a leftist, I kind of like was getting good vibes. But I ultimately found out that these were more capitalistic women who were focused on making the most money possible. I just genuinely didn't take that into account because I was so overwhelmed. So please remember that you're not a bad person for being overwhelmed by the world and making bad decisions. But if you make a bad decision that means just like not within your philosophical joy, you're not a bad person, because somebody else took advantage of you when you were sick. And this is why we need the wisdom and discernment to see people's intentions, even though we can't always read minds. Because I think 2026 Brittany would never have bought that course now, but 2022 Brittany just desperately needed help. And I do think it's really disgusting when people go into health fields in the name of helping people and then charge them basically a price of a car. So learn from my mistakes and avoid them yourself, because trust me, it was hell getting out of that debt. Remember earlier when I gave you guys some rough numbers? Well, you can add another 16,000 to that pile of numbers. Now that we're debt free and we've paid off all the medical debt, all of our bills, everything we owe to everybody, now we're debt free again. And I say we because I got married. Yeah, that happened. So that means that I went from being single in debt to debt free, married into debt, debt free. Okay, so Brittany single and Brittany married kind of married each other, except I did learn my lesson as I went along. So now, at this stage of being debt free, everything is budgeted and everything is balanced, because I'm no longer in survival mode and I'm in living mode. It helps me stay within budget. When I was in survival mode and I thought I was going to unalive and the world was a mess and I didn't know what I was doing here, there really just was not incentive for me to care about 90-year-old Brittany. But now I think of her often. You know, in queer autistic circles, it really is a privilege to grow old. Autistic people and queer people have a high rate of unaliving because of the world we have to live in. It's not that we don't want to exist, it's that it's hard to exist with you. Because the world is bigoted and hateful and they discriminate and they target us. It sounds like, well, if that's the case, then why am I in existence? Especially when it comes from your own family, your own community. It's like, where do I belong? So I really had to philosophically answer that question for myself. Like, okay, Brett, who are you when you're alone? Do you really want to die? And I was like, no, I don't want to die. And it was like, okay, if you don't want to die, why are you planning to? And it was this idea that I could liberate myself from the world, not by abandoning it, by accepting it for what it was. Instead of abandoning the world and shutting myself away, I would fully embrace it for who it was. I would be compassionate and loving and kind towards the world, and also very open with boundaries. My boundaries are for me, they're not for you. And so I have to always care for myself mentally, physically, spiritually, financially, and who I am in the story. This is my formula for being a whole human being. And how you labor, how you make money is so important. Again, you don't always have to bring in a paycheck, but all of us, if we're community members, must labor for the community. Everyone plays a different role. And I think sometimes the messaging you get from the world is everybody must be an entrepreneur, or everybody must be a mother, or everybody must be XYZ. Everybody can't be everything. We all need to play an appropriate role with how we show up for ourselves and each other. Now that the lore stuff is kind of taken care of, present day Brittany continues her special interest in finance. So I do have an autistic special interest in the money bubble, but I also hate everything about it. So I do watch all the finance girlies.
I think the most embarrassing thing about people simping for the ultra wealthy isn't necessarily like the delusion that they will also one day be super wealthy, or the belief that they have more in common with that really rich person than with like a homeless person, because I don't even necessarily think those things are always true. I think the most embarrassing thing is that when you look at how wealth is measured in our society, mostly it's measured by how little you have to deal with poor people.
I do constantly find myself yelling at my phone.
I don't know if I agree with Dave Ramsey's investment assumptions. I don't give a crap if you agree with my investment assumptions. You know what my investment assumption is? My assumption is you're going to be broke until you save money. That's my assumption.
Because some of the advice they give is just so obnoxious and often tied into their religiosity or politic. But I will just say that there are a lot of financial people out there that, even though I disagree with them or roll my eyes at their decisions, they still have really good things to teach you.
In 10 minutes, I'll teach you how to be rich, regardless of where you came from, regardless of your income, and it is easier than you think.
So, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but take it with a grain of salt. I really think all books are good books, even bad books. And I do think, you can learn you learn something from everybody, but use wisdom to discern. One of the consistent themes I see throughout all finance channels is psychology, mental health, and trauma playing a huge role in our relationship with money. This is what philosophy is. It's a love of wisdom. It's sort of the overarching part of our life, and all of these other things fall under it. So as an example, whether you're watching Dave Ramsey or Chelsea Fagan or Remy, it doesn't matter who you're watching, it always comes back to childhood.
What do you remember your family saying about money when you were young?
I got instruction in how to write a check. I got a bank account when I was 15, 16. My mom taught me how to write a check. Pretty much that was all the education my parents gave me about money, except my dad, who was born in the 20s, always said to me, if you have a dime, you should be able to buy a Coke.
That's the lesson you got?
Pretty much.
What does that tell you?
You should be able to spend your money if you've got it. And she was an accountant. I don't know why she didn't teach me more about money.
Why do you think?
Well, you're supposed to find a husband, right?
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
That was it.
The idea being?
Getting a rich husband. Yep.
Get a rich husband.
A lot of my education was how to make guys interested in me.
My family was more the save everything, don't spend anything. We're not going to tell you what to do with the money you save, but my parents are immigrants and extremely dysfunctional around money. They've had separate money their entire lives, and my mom is going through some dementia, so my dad asked me to take over her finances, and I had to go through boxes of stuff and walk into banks and be like, does my mother have an account here? And so it's finally all straightened out, but they have no idea what the other has. And so now we know what my mom has, but I still have no idea what my father has.
Did you grow up in scarcity? Did you grow up with abundance? Were you raised religious? What did your parents say about finances?
I just want to clarify this on my channel generally, which is that I am upper echelon. I live in a high earning, dual income, no kid household. But I grew up very low income. I don't have a college degree, and I am the only person in my family who earns even close to what I earn. And I don't really like to get into it on social media, but like, suffice to say, my husband and I have a lot of responsibility financially to other people in our lives. And the only thing this experience has really taught me is that my life and life in general is more a lottery win than it is a result of hard work.
And coming from an immigrant West Asian home, coming from a family with a lot of kids, coming from a family where my dad was an entrepreneur, there was a lot of conversation about money. My mother would always talk about how much she saved today, how much she spent at Costco, how much it took to feed 8 boys, how much it took to take care of the girls. A big part of my early childhood was hand-me-down clothes from my older cousins. A big part of my childhood was recognizing that I got off-brand stuff and all my friends got name-brand stuff. A big part of my childhood was also growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Orange County, and my parents had 2 cars. So on one hand, we were so privileged because 2 cars, and on the other hand, I never got name-brand stuff, and so I kind of always felt like ostracized. We were also homeschooled until I was about 15, and then I went to public school.
I know what you're thinking. Homeschooled kids are freaks, or that we're weirdly religious or something.
And on the 3rd day, God created the Remington bolt-action rifle so that man could fight the dinosaurs and the homosexuals.
That played a huge role in understanding like my place in the hierarchy. I remember I went to public school for the first time and the popular girls all had name brand Uggs. And I begged my mother for Uggs. I said, please, please, please buy me Uggs. I need to buy Uggs. And my mom came home with Uggs from Costco. So it was the off brand. And I wore them to school and all the popular girls ran up to me and said, oh my God, you got Uggs? And then looked at my Uggs and went, oh, they're off brand. And I had never felt more aware of hierarchies than in that moment. But it's okay because all I ended up doing was becoming a theater kid, moved straight into my emo goth era, and I wore Converse. So, you know, it all fixed itself. You know, for me as a young child, what I took from that was that I had to make a decision about who I wanted to be in the story. Did I care enough to buy Uggs? Because here's the thing, I was working. I was saving my own money. My parents allowed me, since I was a very young child, to work and keep my money. My parents gave us all bank accounts when we were young, and any money I made from babysitting, mowing lawns, lemonade stands, I got to keep. So when I was a teenager, when I was like 16, I saved up enough money to buy a $1,500 dirt bike, a Honda 70cc, and that is what I decided to spend my money on. So, you know, I think it's all about priorities, really. So even current day Brittany, current day me, I do have a budget. We have a budget. We have, now that we're debt free, a little spending budget, and that budget isn't very big. It's about 20 euro a week, and I end up buying a lot with it, but it's not very much. And I do have to save for bigger purchases, but it all makes sense because it's all about priorities. So maybe somebody asks me like, hey, Britt, can you do this week? And I go, oh no, I don't, it's not in the budget. It's not that I don't have the money, but I don't really have the excess money. I make good money, but not enough to overextend because we're not going back into debt unless it's an absolute emergency. And that's where kindness and compassion comes in because there will be an emergency. The question is, will we have enough in savings by the time that happens? I don't know, but I am willing and I understand and I do not judge people who get back into debt when there's an emergency. But I will judge myself if I go back into debt for something I do not need. Pay something I want, like a tattoo or a new hairstyle, but I don't need. So I will save up for those things and those will be my priority. But in my 20s, I would spend it on things I didn't need all the time and it made me feel so alive. It made me feel like I had control in my life because that's what I was seeking. I was seeking a feeling of like, I get a say in my life. And so I would just buy. And I had pretty good credit growing up because I always worked and I basically always paid off my bills. Even though I had a lot of debt, I had pretty good credit. So I could also get like a new car or I could get big purchases or I had like a pretty big line of credit. And that's because I did grow up middle class, which means I had the privilege of knowing a little bit about credit scores, which meant I could kind of figure it out. But with that said, along that journey, I also had an era of my life where I was so depressed, they shut off my phone. I was so depressed, I was living with my friend's parents. I was so depressed that my credit score got to like 400. So I am the last person to judge your financial journey because I have done it all. I've had the credit score of 400. I've had the credit score of 750. I've had the savings of absolutely zero, negative 60,000. And I've had the savings of 10K. I've been all over the map. What I have now, though, is a little bit more consistency. And so instead of it being, 3 steps forward and 2 steps back and 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, it's kind of like 3 steps forward and like step and a half back, maybe if there's an emergency, but I'm getting more ahead than I ever have before. And a big part is that yes, I got married, and that is really nice because it helped me really look for the future in a different way. And I also have a partner now who helps me sit down and we do our financial budget, and we sit down together and we go over numbers. But the unique part of my relationship that might stand out to you is that we're not a double income household. We are a single income, no kid household. So my partner does not bring in a paycheck. And they did work when I met them. They had their own apartment, their own job. But after we got married, it just made more sense for our personal dynamic for me to be the full-time career person because, this job is really work intensive and it requires like a lot of my energy and I just really can't do anything else. I work 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. That's basically what I work. And my partner helps with everything else. We also did move to Croatia. My partner is Croatian. That's a very big deal because it means the way that finances work, the way we deal with tax or accountants or the obligation I have when making money, it just works very different. So example is like my partner handles all of the paperwork for Indiana. Our cat is really sick right now and she's going in and out of vets. He makes all the phone calls for that because I don't speak Croatian. Any appointments we have, immigration stuff, paperwork, doctor's appointments. Can I just tell you, shout out to all my immigrants out here, my parents, everybody who had to learn a new language, who to integrate and assimilate because it is hard. Like going to a place where you don't speak the language and doing something as simple as going to the doctor becomes a completely different, complicated, layered mess. And if I didn't have my partner helping me, I would be so stressed because it is very difficult to navigate such personal and important medical information without speaking the language in a way that makes you feel heard and understood. So shout out to all my immigrants. This process of immigrating has been a life-changing experience. And shout out to all my ancestors who did it because I know how hard it was, right? So when I think about all of the layers of laboring for community, it doesn't always have to involve a paycheck. And I know this because of the way that my family dynamics were growing up. But my partner doesn't bring in a paycheck, but they certainly labor in so many different ways, and I'll always be grateful for that. And with that said, I do think it's important that we recognize that because we are adults, we are in our 30s, of course, if I lost my job, my partner is in a position to turn around and get a job tomorrow. And I think that's really important because you can compare it to sort of a trad wife conservative construct. Like in those constructs, those women often lose out on opportunities in the workforce because they're not updating their resume and they're kind of like not locked in. My partner is not doing that. If my partner needs to, they can get a job. Okay. They might not be able to get a career, but they can get a job. And that's really, really important. Going back to the part of the lore where I said I locked in and decided my career, this is really important. Having a job is one thing. I love a girly with a job. If you want to get a job to pay your bills, I'm here for it. There is a difference between having a job and a career. Only because I'm a planner, I can't go with the flow. I need to know what I'm doing in 20 years.
It's definitely not something I'm excited about having, but at least I have a name for it. At least I can move forward.
So even though my job could sort of be obsolete in 20 years, the industry won't be. There's no reason to think the entertainment industry, the consumer industry, the reading books, watching TikToks, watching the internet will go obsolete. So whatever my industry adapts and becomes, I will adapt along with it. But I have a career, I have an industry I'm a part of, and I love it here. So as a creative, that is my focus. That is the difference between a career and a job to me. As like a job is somewhere you go to pay your bills, which is beautiful. A career is an industry you exist in and you build upon. So everything that we do as a unit is dedicated to kind of making this thing happen. And I love it. So the reason I chose this career, which was a big part of financial stability, was because I knew I could do it every day forever. There are so many things I do. I have 3 technical jobs. Technically, I have 3 ways I get paid, and 2 are part-time and 1 is full-time. The full-time is making YouTube content. I stream 5 days a week and I do this twice a week. But I also have part-time jobs. I make adult content and or sort of like art pieces that I do part-time, and that's wonderful. And then I host things on Patreon, which yes, technically is about funding the YouTube channel, but realistically, I need to take hours out of my day. Every Saturday is dedicated to the Patreon. So it becomes like a part-time job on top of, streaming every day or posting content. So everything adds up in terms of availability, time, effort, spoons. I love talking about philosophy.
Which 3 famous people would you have at your slumber party? Let me think. Plato. Duh.
I've done all kinds of things on the internet, but philosophy is the thing I could do every day forever.
Dude, this book says that I don't exist unless I think I do.
But what if I don't? Wish somebody to take those books away from him.
I read philosophy books. I love philosophy. I watch philosophical debates. I just love everything about philosophy because it begs to question why. Why do we exist? Why do we keep going? Why should I labor? Why should I care? You know, what are my morals? What are my ethics?
You don't drive down Broadway to get to Broadway.
And when it comes to making money, I don't know anything that's more philosophical because it's connected to everything, right? Money is political. Money is about morals and ethics. And I'm sure lots of people are very angry with the way that I make money. But at the same time, I have to be the one to face myself every day about how I make money. And I need to make sure I feel good about it. So even in this career, I could have made a ton more money if I sensationalized myself, objectified myself in ways that I know you're saying, but Brittany, you already do objectify yourself. Agree to disagree. Objectification to me is making myself into a product that I am not proud of and that I don't feel dignified in. And I have never done that because I refuse to. If you see it that way, that's fine. That's not how I see it. So I keep myself to a standard by my morals, not yours, right? So I've never allowed myself to be sensationalized, objectified. I will not be a joke for money. That's a very important part of this industry. In my personal time, when it comes to my hobbies, love finances, love politics, love, fashion, love makeup, love interior design, but not as a career. And as a little neurodivergent girly who begged her mother for a soccer ball because she watched Bend It Like Beckham, or she watched one episode of Will and Grace where Grace was an interior designer and I was like, I'm going to be an interior designer. Trust me when I say I have attempted to be everything my whole life. And it wasn't until I turned 30 that I was like, Brittany, you have to lock in. What do you want to do for a living? And I was like, what do I want to do? I do this.
It's so beautiful.
And I've been doing it for 7 years. It's the most amazing experience. And I'm so happy I found my place here, my way here. But the only reason I did that was because I went to therapy. I locked in on my values and I focused on my why. Why do I exist? Why do I stay living? Why do I wake up every day? And why do I keep doing this? Because it's not just about me, even though it's definitely about me, but it's not just about me. I have family and relationships and a world I care about, and I want to do better by it. I want to focus on activism and attempting to make the world a less bad place. And I really think I can do some good while I'm here. And I hope that I do. I hope that the work that I put out is something I'm always proud of, even though I know I definitely have not always been proud of my work. I hope that I continue to grow and be a less bad person every day. But finances are a part of being a whole human being. Just like your mental health or physical health or anything else, finances are so connected to your childhood, your upbringing, your culture, and it's a big part of identity. I just reviewed Blue Therapy for my members on my stream channel, Brittany Simon. This is Bert Simon. Bert Simon's the commentary channel and Brittany Simon is the stream channel. On the Brittany Simon channel, I reviewed Blue Therapy, and this father, this partner, fiance, he got made redundant. So he got let go from his job and he woke up every day for 2 months and put on his work uniform as if he was going to work. Okay, so he's been jobless for 2 months. Yeah, that's what that means? Brother in Christ, brother.
It's embarrassing to say, but literally I'll dress up like I'm going to work.
This is so common. It's insane. I can't tell you how many men have done this for years. I hear stories, guys. I watch all the finance shows for this reason. I'm telling you right now, you guys got to lock in. I know they're all really capitalists, but there is story after story of men doing this for years. Some men have been doing it for 5 to 6 years, dressing up every day like they're going to work, and they're not going to work. It's the most insane thing I've ever heard of in my life.
And then I would literally circle around, and as long as she's gone to
Oh
work.
my God. Because his identity as a man was threatened because he, quote, got let go. And he lied to the love of his life for 2 months. She would wake up in the morning and kiss him goodbye for work, and they would both go to their own jobs just for him to drive away, turn back around and come back home because his identity was tied into his gender. When I say I'm a gender deconstructionist and I say I don't identify, or I do identify, or sometimes I am, or sometimes I'm not, what I'm saying is like, I am not going to live in a world, I'm not going to live in a marriage where my identity is so tied to money or gender or expectation that I lie and hurt the people around me just so I can live up to a version of a self that doesn't exist. Greatest lesson I ever learned in my life was from my therapist. She said, maybe stop living for the version of you in your head and start living for your joy and accept it for what it is. So when I was younger, I wanted to be Amanda Priestley, a girl boss, a capitalist, a rich girly. And when I actually started living for my joy and I started being happy and I started actually liking my life, I realized it was nothing like I imagined, but it was better. It was something I couldn't imagine because I was so busy living for this version of what I've been taught my whole life. I love my life. It's really, really perfect for me, for Bert. And in some ways, I'm sure it's what I imagined in terms of being a content creator, but I never thought I'd live in Europe. And I never thought I was going to marry someone from a different country. And I never thought I was going to be an immigrant like my parents, but here I am. I never thought I was going to work on learning a second language because I moved countries. I never thought I was going to be disabled. Maybe I'm autistic, but I never thought I was going to be physically disabled. And now I'm physically disabled and I'm autistic. It's like, there's so many things about my life I didn't know they were coming. And now that I know they're here, I can't wait to discover more things about myself I don't know. I can't wait to meet myself at 45. I think she's going to be so cool. And I just know that my life in many ways is just getting started. And I'm so excited about that. So that is what philosophy has given me. That is what has helped me move through my mental health. That is why I went to a therapist. That's why I continue to promote therapy, and I will go to a therapist again because, it's never ending. But I'm not in survival mode anymore. I am in living mode. So yes, lock in, make more money, because you can't save your way out of poverty. That is just the truth. But first and foremost, before you think about making more money, ask yourself, why do I labor? What is the purpose of my life? And what was I made for?
I used to float, now I just fall down. I used to know, but I'm not sure now what I was made for. What was I made for?